The cabin in the storm, the wind howled like a wild animal through the trees. Snow covered everything outside, and the mountain looked quiet and empty. Jack pulled his coat tighter as he climbed the last few steps to his cabin. His boots were wet, and his fingers felt numb. It had been a long day of hunting, and now all he wanted was warmth and sleep. He opened the cabin door slowly, letting the wind push against him. Inside, everything looked the same. His old wooden chair, the firewood stack, the hunting rifle by the wall. But something felt wrong. Jack didn't know why, but the air felt different. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The storm outside became a low sound in the background. Like a growl, he walked over to the small kitchen, ready to light the fire. But then he saw it. A metal cup was lying on the table on its side. That wasn't right. Jack always placed it upside down on the shelf. He picked it up slowly, his eyes moving to the floor. There wet footprints, small ones. Leading toward the storage room, Jack froze. He lived alone. There was no one else up here, not for miles. He reached for his hunting knife, just in case, and walked slowly to the storage room door. He opened it with care. 1 inch at a time, darkness filled the space inside. But the smell was different, damp, almost like the forest. Then he saw something move in the corner, a shape, small and thin, hiding behind boxes. He stepped back and raised the lantern. That's when he saw her. Not a bear, not a wild animal. A girl or something close to it. Her skin glowed faint blue in the lantern light, and her eyes were large and silver. She looked at him with pure fear, shaking like she had no strength left. She wore torn clothes made of a strange, soft material. Her feet were bare, and her arms had strange marks, cuts, and bruises. She backed up as far as she could, pressing against the wall. Jack didn't move. He kept the lantern steady and lowered the knife. "It's okay," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." She didn't understand the words, but something in his voice made her stop. She watched him closely, like a cornered animal, ready to run or fight. Jack slowly set the knife on the floor and placed the lantern down. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a protein bar. He opened it and placed it near the door of the storage room, then stepped back. Minutes passed, but she finally moved, cautiously, like a deer in a hunter's sight. She crawled forward, took the food, and quickly returned to her corner. She sniffed it, then ate like she hadn't eaten in days. Jack watched her quietly. He had no idea who she was or where she came from, but he knew one thing: she wasn't human, and she was scared, cold, and alone that night. Jack made a bed for her by the fire, but she didn't come out of the storage room. She sat near the door and watched him all night. Jack cooked soup and left it near her, then tried to rest. But sleep didn't come easy. He kept thinking, why was she here? Was she dangerous? Was someone looking for her? In the middle of the night, he woke up to the sound of soft footsteps. The girl had come closer to the fire, holding the blanket he left. She didn't speak, but her eyes looked softer now. Less afraid, she sat on the floor, wrapped in the blanket, and stared at the flames. Jack didn't say anything. He just added another log to the fire. For a moment, the cabin was warm, quiet, and strange. A man and something not quite human, sharing the same space in silence. Outside, the storm still roared, but inside, something had changed. The girl wasn't running anymore, and Jack wasn't alone. Whatever had brought her here, whoever she was, her story was just beginning. And Jack knew deep down, his peaceful mountain life would never be the same again. The fire had burned low, but the cabin was still warm. Jack opened his eyes just before sunrise, not because of the cold, but because of a strange sound. A soft voice was whispering something fast, over and over again. At first, he thought it was the wind. But then he saw her, sitting by the fire, her silver eyes wide open, glowing in the darkness. She was talking to herself, maybe she was dreaming. Her voice didn't sound calm. It sounded scared, urgent. She clutched the blanket tightly and spoke in her alien language. Shaking her head, Jack sat up slowly, not wanting to scare her. Then, suddenly, she turned toward the window, her eyes locked on the snowy forest outside. She pointed and spoke one word in English, just one, but it chilled Jack's bones. Danger. Jack stood quickly and grabbed his coat. He went to the window and looked out, but the snow was untouched. The trees were still. No tracks, no sounds, just white silence. He turned to her, confused. "There's nothing out there," he said quietly, but she didn't seem to hear him. She stayed frozen, eyes still staring at the window, like she was waiting for something to appear. Later that morning, she was quiet again. Jack gave her food soft: bread, water, and dried meat. She ate carefully, still watching the door like someone might burst through at any second. Jack decided to check her wounds. She had a deep cut on her leg and strange blue marks on her arm. He knelt beside her and held up a bandage. "Let me help," he said, his voice calm. She didn't move. Slowly, he reached out and gently touched her ankle. She flinched, but didn't pull away. Jack worked fast, cleaning the wound with warm water, wrapping it with care. She watched him the whole time, her eyes curious now instead of afraid. When he finished, she spoke again quietly. Slowly, pointing at her own arm, she said a word that sounded like tracker. Jack frowned. "Tracker." He repeated. She nodded and touched her wrist, then shook her head. She wanted him to understand someone had been tracking her, but now it was gone. Jack grabbed a pencil and paper and handed them to her. She took it with shaky hands and started drawing circles, stars, and strange ship-like shapes. Then a black shadow, a tall, sharp figure with red eyes. She pointed to it, then pointed to herself, then drew lines that looked like running feet. Jack understood. "You were running away," he said. She nodded. She drew again, showing a large ship above a planet. Then an explosion. Something had happened. Something bad. She looked at Jack and said one clear word: "Hunted." Jack sat back in silence. He had hoped this was just an accident, maybe a crash landing. But now he knew she wasn't just lost, she was being hunted. And whoever was after her might be coming here. That night, Jack locked the doors and checked every window he placed. Tools and ropes near the fireplace, just in case they had to leave fast. The alien woman, he started calling her Blue, sat by the fire, her eyes never leaving the door. She was still afraid, but not of Jack anymore. Something worse was out there as the wind howled again. Blue stood and walked to the front door. She placed her hand on the wood and closed her eyes. Then she turned back to Jack and whispered a strange phrase in her language. He didn't know what it meant, but it sounded like a warning. Something was coming at midnight. Jack was woken again, but this time wasn't Blue's voice or the wind. It was a sharp crack outside, like something stepped on ice. He rushed to the window, heart pounding. Still nothing but snow, but Blue was already awake. Standing by the fire with wide eyes, she pointed to the woods, then to the ceiling. Jack didn't understand at first. Then she said a word he hadn't heard from her before: ship. His blood ran cold. She wasn't just warning him, she was telling him the hunters were near, maybe already above them. Jack turned off the lights and put out the fire. The cabin fell into darkness. Blue stood beside him, her hands shaking in his. They both stared at the door, listening. Outside, the snow fell gently, covering any signs of what might be moving in the forest. But Jack knew now something was watching, and it wasn't human. The snow had stopped falling, but the mountain was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Jack stood outside the cabin, looking at the gray sky. He had a feeling something heavy in his chest, like pressure before a storm. Blue stood behind him, half hidden by the doorway. Her silver eyes watched the sky with fear. She said nothing, but Jack saw her hands were shaking again. He didn't ask questions this time. He just waited. Then he heard it. A low hum, so deep it made the trees tremble. At first, he thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. Jack looked up, and that's when he saw them. 3 glowing lights in the sky, slowly moving across the clouds. They weren't planes. They made no sound except the deep hum. The lights pulsed like breathing, red and white and green. Blue gasped and backed away from the door. She spoke quickly in her language. Pointing up with panic in her voice, Jack grabbed his rifle, though he knew it wouldn't help. Whatever those ships were, they weren't from Earth. They weren't here for a visit. Suddenly, one of the lights shot downward. It moved fast, like a falling star, and vanished behind the trees. The mountain shook slightly. Like something heavy had landed, Blue grabbed Jack's arm and said a word he now understood. Jack ran inside and closed the door. He threw more wood across it, locking it tight. He didn't ask Blue what those ships wanted. He already knew they wanted her. Jack checked his traps near the forest edge. If anything moved out there, they'd hear it. He placed a small mirror near the window to watch the tree line. And then he waited. Blue sat near the fire, hugging her knees. Jack crouched beside her and asked, "Can they see the cabin?" She nodded. "Can we hide?" She shook her head slowly. Then she took a small metal piece from her coat. Looked broken, but still pulsing with light. She touched it, and it blinked blue. She whispered something and pointed to the trees again. Jack leaned closer. "Was that a tracker?" he asked. She nodded. "They follow this," she said in a soft voice. Jack understood now. The device had led them here. Without it, they might lose the trail, but if it was still active, they'd come straight to them. Without a word, Jack stood, opened the stove, and threw the tracker inside. The fire hissed, and the metal sparked for a moment before turning black. Blue watched with wide eyes. "No more tracker," Jack said firmly. "No more signals." But it was too late. That night, the hum came again, closer this time. Blue was already awake, crouched by the door. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just waited, silent and still like prey in the dark. Then they heard it. A strange clicking sound outside, like metal tapping on wood. Jack raised his rifle and aimed at the door. He didn't expect to win a fight, but he would fight anyway. The doorknob turned slightly, then stopped. Something sniffed around the edges of the door. Jack held his breath. Blue pressed her fingers together, whispering a word that sounded like shield. Then silence. Whoever or whatever it was gone. But Jack knew it would come back. The next morning, he followed the fresh snow outside. There were tracks, but not like human boots, more like claws, long and sharp. The prints stopped at the trees. As if the creature had flown away, Jack stared at the sky. The ships were gone, but he didn't feel safe. He returned to the cabin, where Blue had drawn something on the floor with ashes, a symbol like a warning. Jack pointed at it. "What does this mean?" Blue looked at him, then said in a low voice, "Hunter." That night, Jack took Blue down the mountain path. There was an old cave system nearby, deep and dark, hard to find. He had used it for shelter once during a snowstorm. Now it might save their lives. They carried only what they needed: food, a blanket, matches, and the rifle. As they reached the cave entrance, Blue stopped. She looked back at the mountain cabin, her eyes sad. "This was safe," she said. Jack nodded. "It was," he answered, "but not anymore." They stepped into the darkness of the cave. The wind outside cried through the trees above them. High in the sky, the strange lights returned, blinking slowly like eyes. The hunters were still out there, and Jack had made a choice. He would not run alone, not while she still had nowhere to go. Asterisk, the cave was cold, quiet, and dark. Water dripped from the ceiling. Echoing through the stone like a heartbeat, Jack sat near a small fire, warming his hands. While Blue rested with her back to the wall, she hadn't spoken much since they left the cabin. But her eyes kept drifting to her coats, pacifically. To the hidden pocket inside it, Jack watched her silently. He could see something was bothering her. Something more than fear. She kept touching her chest, where she had hidden the strange piece of alien metal, the same type of device Jack had seen before, the one they had thrown into the fire. But this was different. It wasn't a tracker. It was something else. Finally, she pulled it out. It looked like a broken piece of glass. Glowing faintly with a blue light, Jack leaned closer, his eyes fixed on it. The light inside moved like smoke, dancing behind the cracked surface. Blue touched a small point on the side, and the glow became stronger. Then a sound filled the cover. Soft hum, rising and falling like a voice whispering through air. Jack stood up, ready to grab his rifle, but Blue raised her hand. "It's okay," she said quietly. "It's me." The device floated out of her hand and stopped in the air, spinning slowly. Then light, a bright image appeared in the cave like a hologram, glowing against the walls. Jack's mouth dropped open. He saw a younger version of Blue, standing on a large alien platform. She was wearing armor, standing with others. Then explosions, fire, chaos, her people running, screaming, and behind them, massive ship, black as night, with red lights and a sharp, cruel shape. It looked like a monster made of metal. Jack took a step back. The vision changed again. Now Blue was speaking to a group of aliens, pointing to the sky, showing maps. She looked like a leader, but no one listened. The others walked away from her, and the image faded to silence. The device dropped to the floor. The cave became quiet again. Only the fire crackling softly. Jack turned to Blue. "You warned them," he said. She nodded. "They didn't believe me," she whispered. "I told them the dark ships were coming." Jack sat down beside her, his mind spinning. "All of that. It happened before you came to Earth." Blue nodded again. "They attacked my world," she said, her voice low. "My people lost. I ran. But before I left, I sent this." She picked up the small device again. "Signal," she said. "To someone who might help." Jack frowned. "Help you? Like allies?" She looked at him, unsure of the word. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe. They come to stop me." Jack felt a chill deeper than the cold around them. "You don't know who got the signal," he said. Blue didn't answer. She looked down at the fire, her face full of worry. Later that night, Jack climbed out of the cave to check the sky. The stars were bright, clear, and sharp, but one star blinked differently. It pulsed red for a second, then blue, then vanished. Jack narrowed his eyes. That wasn't a star. It was a ship. And it had just received something. He returned to the cave quickly. "We need to move again," he said. Blue looked tired, too weak to walk far. But she nodded. "I know," she said. They heard it. Jack helped her stand and packed what little they had. He didn't know where they would go next, maybe deeper into the mountains. But he knew this much. They couldn't stay. Not after the signal. Just as they reached the cave entrance, Jack turned and looked back. The fire had gone out. The shadows on the walls faded slowly. But one symbol had appeared on the stone, marked by the hologram light. It was a circle with two wings. Jack didn't know what it meant, but Blue stared at it and whispered one word. "War." She turned and walked into the night. And Jack followed. The sky above them was no longer silent. Somewhere out there, a reply was coming. Maybe a friend. Maybe an enemy. But someone had heard the signal she sent, and they were on their way. Snowflakes drifted gently from the sky, soft and quiet. But Jack felt no peace. Each step he took crunched under his boots as he returned to the cabin, his old home, now broken, cold, and dangerous. Blue followed behind him, limping her breath. Showing in the frozen air, she was healing slowly, but her energy was still low. Her eyes never stopped scanning the woods. She knew, just like Jack, that the hunters weren't gone. They were watching, waiting. The cabin looked empty from the outside, but inside, the story was different. The front door hung loose from when the creature tried to open it. The chairs were overturned, the table broken. Claw marks scratched deep into the walls. Jack didn't care about the furniture anymore. He only cared about one thing, now preparing for their return. He walked out into the snow and began setting traps. Not fancy traps, not like in movies, just simple ones: ropes, spikes, noisemakers tied to cans and wires. He used everything he had. He even set mirrors in the trees, angled just right, so he could see around the cabin without leaving it. Blue watched him work, her face unreadable. Then she walked to the tree line and stopped. She bent down and touched the ground. Jack walked over and looked. 2 footprints, not from a man, and not hers. These were long, heavy, and shaped like a 3-clawed bird. They had come while he and Blue were in the cave. They had searched the cabin and left something behind inside. The cabin in the far corner, Jack found it. A small silver cube, glowing faintly. He didn't touch it. He waved Blue over. And she looked at it carefully. She spoke in her language. Then said one word Jack understood: trap. Jack picked up a metal rod from the fireplace and gently touched the cube. Nothing happened. He pressed it harder. Suddenly, a flash of light shot out so fast it burned the rod clean in half. Jack stared at it, then tossed the half-burned rod aside. "They're not just hunting," he said. "They're setting traps of their own." That night, Jack didn't sleep. He sat near the door, rifle in hand, watching the mirrors outside. The wind howled across the mountain, but now he could tell the difference. He could hear something walking, something heavy, moving between the trees. Blue sat by the window, staring up at the stars. Then she turned to him and said softly, "They want me alive." Jack looked at her, confused. "Alive?" She nodded. "They want what I know, not just me." She tapped the side of her head. "I have their secrets." Jack thought for a moment. "So they'll keep coming, no matter what." She nodded again. Hours passed. Then a sharp noise rang. Through the trees, metal hitting metal. One of the traps had been triggered. Jack stood, raised the rifle, and looked through the mirror. There at the edge of the woods, a tall figure moved slowly, cloaked in black, with red eyes shining in the dark. It didn't run. It just walked straight toward the cabin. Not afraid, not in a hurry, Jack aimed the rifle. But the figure stopped just before the light reached it. It raised one long hand and pointed at the cabin. Then it turned and vanished into the trees again. The next morning, Jack and Blue checked the trap. It had caught something. Not the hunter, but a drone, small and metal, with sharp legs and a broken camera. Blue picked it up and frowned. "Scout," she said. "They send these first." Jack had an idea. He took the drone, removed the damaged camera, and placed it on a pole near the edge of the cabin. Now he had his own warning system. If the red light blinked again, it meant they were close. Later that day, they found another gift left by the hunters. A long mark on the cabin wall, scratched deep like a symbol. Blue stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "Warning." Jack nodded. "It's a game to them," he said. "They want us to be afraid." But Jack wasn't afraid anymore. He was angry. He had lived alone in peace. And they brought war to his doorstep. They hunted someone who had no weapon, no army, and no home. And now they'd have to face him. That night, Jack set the last of his traps. He stood by the fire, looked at Blue, and said, "When they come back, I'll be ready." Blue nodded slowly for the first time. She didn't look scared. She looked like someone who believed in him. Outside, the wind began to change. It was no longer gentle, it carried a hum low, deep and angry. They were coming again, but this time, Jack wasn't hiding. He was waiting. Asterisk, the first warning came from the drone's broken eye. The red light blinked twice, then turned off. Jack saw it from the cabin window and said only one word. Now, Blue didn't ask questions. She grabbed the small pack Jack had prepared: food, water, blankets, and the glowing device she had hidden from the hunters. Jack slung the rifle over his shoulder and helped her to the door. They didn't have time for shoes or warmth. They needed speed. Snow crunched under their boots as they moved through the trees. Jack knew the forest better than anyone. But this time, it wasn't a peaceful walk. This time, it felt like a trap waiting to spring behind them. The humming started again, soft, but rising, that strange sound that always came before the hunters appeared. Slow and steady, like a machine breathing. Blue stumbled once, her injured leg slowing her down. Jack caught her and whispered, "We keep moving." She nodded, but her face was pale, her breath sharp. The path Jack chose led uphill, winding through rocks and frozen trees. He wasn't heading to the cave, not this time. He was going somewhere higher, somewhere no machine would expect. There was an old watchtower farther up the mountain, broken and half covered in snow, but the top still had something important: a solar panel and a backup radio. If they could reach it, they could send a signal, not just to Blue's people, but to Earth too. Someone had to know what was happening up here. They climbed in silence. The only sound their breath and the wind in the trees. Then behind them, sharp blast echoed through the forest. A tree exploded in sparks, hit by something fast and hot. Blue screamed and dropped to the snow. Jack turned, rifle raised. He didn't see the shooter, but he knew they weren't far. Another shot came, hitting a stone near his head. They ran again, slipping over ice and broken roots. Jack fired once behind him. Not to hit but to scare. It worked for a moment. They reached a narrow ledge where the snow had melted slightly. Blue was shaking, her skin glowing faintly. "I can't," she whispered, falling to her knees. Jack knelt beside her and pulled out a tiny injector she had shown him once. He pressed it to her neck, and it hissed softly. Her eyes fluttered, the glow in her skin growing brighter. "I'm okay," she said, though her voice trembled. Jack helped her up and pointed to the cliffs ahead. Just a little more. The humming grew louder above the trees. A dark shape floated, one of the hunters' drones. Scanning the ground with red lights, Jack pulled Blue under a low rock shelf. They stayed there, holding their breath as the red light passed over them and moved on. Once the drone was gone, they moved again. Finally, after what felt like hours, they saw the tower. It stood like a skeleton, half buried in snow, its roof broken, its door hanging open. Jack climbed first. Clearing the way, Blue followed, nearly falling on the ladder. But Jack caught her arm. At the top, they found the old radio, covered in frost, wires hanging loose. Jack wiped the snow off and started working. He didn't know alien tech, but he knew radios, and the solar panel still held a little power. Blue placed her glowing device next to the radio and pressed her hand to it. Lights blinked, and a soft pulse filled the tower. The signal was going out somewhere, to someone. Then the tower shook. Jack looked down and saw them, two dark figures. Tall and sharp, walking through the trees. They moved fast, not running, but coming with purpose. Jack aimed the rifle, knowing it would do little. Blue stood beside him and whispered, "Let me." She raised both hands, and a pulse of light shot from her palms. The snow around the tower lit up Blue, and the hunters stopped, confused. She was using her energy again, but Jack saw the cost her. Legs shook, and blood dripped from her nose. He caught her as she fell. The radio beeped once, then stopped. The signal was sent. Now all they could do was survive. The hunters looked up at the tower and began to climb. Jack laid Blue down gently, then stood in front of the stairs. "Rifle ready, if they want you," he said quietly. "They'll have to go through me." He didn't care if he had one bullet or none. He wasn't moving. Outside, the wind began to roar again. The mountain held its breath, and from the stars above, something answered. A new light blinked across the sky, bright and coming closer. The wind howled around the tower like it was trying to scream a warning. Snow spun through the air in sharp circles, cutting across Jack's face. He stood on the broken steps, rifle in hand, heart pounding like a drum. Below him, the two hunters were climbing fast. Their black armor reflected the gray sky, and their red eyes glowed like burning coals. Behind Jack, Blue lay motionless, her skin dim, her energy nearly gone. She had sent the signal, but the price had been heavy. Jack didn't know if anyone had heard it, if anyone was coming. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that these two monsters weren't getting past him. The first hunter reached the stairs. Moving without sound, it raised its sharp weapon, shaped like a spear but glowing red-hot. Jack aimed and fired. The shot hit the armor, knocking the hunter back, but not down. It hissed like metal grinding against bone. Then climbed again, faster this time. Jack reached into his coat, found his last bullet. He loaded it slowly, fingers shaking from the cold and fear. As the hunter reached the top, Jack didn't aim for the body. He aimed for the red eye. He fired, and the shot struck true. The creature let out a high scream and tumbled backward off the ledge, crashing through the trees below. But the second hunter was already climbing. This one was bigger, its armor heavier, its eyes darker. Jack had no bullets left. He grabbed a metal pole from the broken tower and stood tall. He didn't run, he didn't beg, he just waited. The hunter reached the top and raised its arm to strike. But then light, a bright white light, broke through the clouds above. The sky cracked open like glass. A ship appeared, not dark and sharp like the hunters. This one was smooth, silver, glowing with blue and gold. It moved silently, floating. Above the tower, the hunter froze, its red eyes turning to the sky. A beam of light shot down from the ship, blinding and hot. The hunter roared, but too late. Its body lit up, then exploded into ash. The snow fell silent again. Jack dropped the pole, breathing hard. He turned to Blue, who was blinking slowly. She looked at the light above and smiled weakly. "They came," she whispered. The ship lowered slowly, stopping just above the tower. From the bottom, a platform opened, and 3 figures stepped out. They looked like Blue but older, dressed in armor with glowing marks on their foreheads. One of them spoke in her language, then looked at Jack. Blue nodded, then turned to Jack and said, "They are my people. The ones who believed my signal." Jack looked at the new arrivals, unsure what to say. He was just a man from Earth, from a mountain cabin. But he had protected her when no one else would. The lead alien stepped forward and spoke in a calm voice. "You kept her safe." Jack nodded. "She didn't deserve to be hunted," he said. The alien looked at him with respect. "You are brave for a human." Jack smiled a little. "Don't tell anyone. They might expect more from me." Blue reached out her hand. "Come with us," she said. Jack hesitated. He looked out over the mountains, over the snow and the forest. This was his home, quiet, rough, peaceful, but it would never be the same again. Too many things had changed. He looked at Blue, at her tired but hopeful eyes. He thought of the nights by the fire, the danger they survived, the way she trusted him, and he knew, deep down, he had changed too. He shook his head slowly. "Not this time," he said gently. "This is your journey." Blue didn't argue. She nodded, stepped forward, and hugged. You were my shelter," she whispered, "my fire in the cold." Then she stepped onto the platform, and the ship began to rise. Jack watched as it vanished into the clouds. Leaving behind only quiet wind and falling snow, he stood there. For a long time, alone but not lonely. Then he turned and walked back down the mountain. His rifle was empty, his cabin broken, but his heart full. Because somewhere in the stars, a girl with glowing skin would remember him. Not as a warrior, not as a soldier, but as the human who made her feel safe. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change a life. Or save a world.